truth, because I'm normally the one who's sort of used to doing the introducing rather than talking about anything in particular. But it's also difficult because I've got 15 minutes to cram in the life of, it's actually Sapphire is how they pronounced it in the day. You're quite right, it's spelt Sophia, but it was styled Sapphire. And she was a woman who seemed to cram the experience of 3 lifetimes into her 72 years. Now, I'm not a historian. I'm a journalist. Thank you, Daisy. It's absolutely true. And I sort of went about this like a journalist. So let me just give you, forgive me, the headlines, first of all. Sophia, princess. Sophia, daughter of the last Maharaja of Punjab. Sophia is the goddaughter of Queen Victoria. She lives at Hampton Court. She is a chain-smoking competitive hockey player. She is a champion dog breeder. She's an accomplished musician, a keen photographer, one of the first women in Britain to ride a bicycle in public, a doyen of fashion. She's also a militant suffragette, a very close friend of Emmeline Pankhurst, the bane of Winston Churchill's life and a thorn in the side of George V. Oh yes, and she's also a World War I nurse and an Indian revolutionary, and I haven't even got 2/3 the way through her life. So this is quite a tough ask, and I am really, really well aware of how very lucky I am to have her as my subject. Now, I'll tell you how I found her, because you're right, I was a journalist working on the Daily Politics till 2010, and I took some time off to have this little fella here. It's a gratuitous picture of a baby to make you love me. The R means it's working. But it actually gave me time to look through papers that I wouldn't have normally had any time for, to be honest. And there was a local newspaper that came through the door, and I was sort of leafing through it, and I stopped at this particular picture, and I couldn't go any further. It was subtitled Suffragette selling copies of the newspaper outside Hampton Court, and it's a striking picture. You'll agree, you know, that is a woman who has fight in her eyes, but that wasn't what saved her, to be honest, from the recycling, because even though this is a black and white picture, I just knew that her skin was as brown as mine, and there was something about the face that reminded me of people that I knew very well. Actually, she looks a lot like an auntie of mine. And so I started looking, I mean, it was just that. And I started sort of, you know, looking a bit more deeply into this story. And then I found out her name was Sophia Dileep Singh, which was immediately tantalizing, because Singh is my name through marriage. I'm married to that gorgeous hunk of physicist over there who now wants to take his own life at the front of the hall. She was a princess of Punjab. Well, you know, all my ancestors come from Punjab as well, so that was another a thread. And, you know, for God's sake, I've always thought of myself as a feminist. I'm a political journalist, and I had no idea about this woman, and I felt, frankly, ashamed of myself. So I started doing a little bit of digging. Now, there were some things that came really easy, because if you are of Punjabi origin, you will know about Sophia's grandfather, this man here, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Sher-e-Punjab is what we call him, the lion of Punjab, the one-eyed king. From the age of 14, Ranjit Singh, who had suffered smallpox as a child, which is why his face is so pockmarked, and he's lost the sight in one eye. One side was slightly wizened, but on a horse he was unstoppable. And he went throughout the north of India, and it was an unstoppable conquest. He gathered together land and wealth, and he had a reign of 50 years in which he united all the disparate tribes and also the religions of Punjab together. One of his courtiers once asked him, "Why is it that God has taken one of your eyes?" And he said, "It's so that I can look at all faiths the same way through my one remaining eye." So he's venerated, and he also has this sort of aspect of the supernatural. One of the things that he did was he wore the Kohinoor Diamond. I mean, you've probably heard of the Kohinoor. At the time, it was uncut, so if you've seen it at the Tower, it didn't look that way when he owned it. It was the size of a hen's egg, 186 carats of it, and it was strapped to his bicep. And everybody knew that it carried a curse, and yet he wore it every day as if thumbing his nose at fate. Now, Sophia's grandmother is also very interesting, because Ranjit took many wives, but Rani Jindal was the youngest. This is actually a portrait painting towards the end of her life. And and she's still a very striking woman, but there's much written about her, and she was very beautiful. And she was said to move with the grace of a dancer. Someone wrote that she moved with the fluidity of water. But she was the daughter of Ranjit Singh's kennel keeper. And Aulak Singh was just a wily old bastard, frankly, and he used to thrust his young daughter from the time of her puberty into the face of this old king and say, take her as a bride and she will be this elixir of youth. And he resisted for quite some time, but then ended up marrying her when she was barely 18 and he was 55. And they had a child. This is Sophia's father, the boy in the middle of this picture here, Dileep Singh. Now, Ranjit Singh never got to know his son, really, because before the boy was even a year old, he died very peacefully in his sleep. And thereafter followed 5 years of bloodshed as all his older brothers happily bludgeoned, stabbed, and poisoned each other to death. And then the last man standing, I say man, he was a boy of 5, was Dileep Singh. And his mother, who is actually one of my favorite characters in the book, Sophia's grandmother, came out of Purdah, out of the Zanana, where all the women were meant to be hidden, and she said, I will govern. And she sat on the throne with her little boy in her lap. She was the regent. And there were people who did not like this. Partly they didn't like taking any kind of orders from a woman, and partly it was a woman of such low birth. They did not like it. And so who takes advantage of this disquiet? Well, the British. They could not touch the Punjab while the lion was alive, but they saw their chance after his death. So first they came as friends of Dileep, and they befriended him, and then they promptly betrayed him. There were 2 manufactured wars, the Anglo-Sikh wars, and then they dragged his mother screaming from him and locked her in a tower. And she was begging them and begging the courtiers, please stop this, don't take my boy away from him. They are taking Punjab by stealth. And no one lifted a finger to help her. And then they told this frightened little boy that he had to sign over his kingdom, his wealth, and basically his family's future. And this is a picture of that submission of Dileep Singh as he signs over his birthright to Sir Henry Harding. And they take him away from Punjab because they just don't want him there. If he's there, he's liable to be a rallying point for dissent. So they take him hundreds of miles away and they put him in the care of a Scottish couple, very nice people, very decent people. And there Dileep grows. He spends his formative years till he's 15. And he turns into a very beautiful young man. They teach him how to be an Englishman. He plays parlour games, he learns about cricket, he learns about Shakespeare, he reads the Bible from cover to cover, and he converts to Christianity and breaks the heart of his mother, who's languishing in Nepal now. By the way, it's a really lovely story, and I haven't got time to tell you, so I will tell you. She escapes from her prison cell, and when she does, she leaves notes and jewels on the floor telling the British, don't think I don't pay for your hospitality. And so she ends up in Nepal, and her heart is broken. She thinks she can take everything, but not the fact that he has given up on his Sikh faith. And when he gets to the age of 15, he starts to become curious about this great Maharani of England, Queen Victoria, and he asks if he can visit her. Now, the fascination is actually mutual because Queen Victoria is obsessed with news of this beautiful young Maharaja. People talk about his beauty and his refined manners, but when he converts to Christianity, she is utterly gripped. Perhaps she thinks this is a way to Christianize the eastern part of her empire, but she wants to meet him. So when he says he wants to meet her, she sweeps aside all the reservations of her courtiers and her prime minister and says, yes, let him come. And so he makes his way to England before his 16th birthday, and it is a mutual and passionate love that they have, kind of a twisted Shakespearean Greek mother-son. She's the surrogate mother that he is longing for, and he's this beautiful creature, exotic and refined, who she can't get enough of. That picture there was commissioned by Queen Victoria. It was painted in the drawing room of Buckingham Palace, and you can see around his neck he's wearing a cameo of Victoria, which he was never far from. And life seems really good. It's going to be great for the Dileep Singhs. Anything he does is fine by Queen Victoria. He basically goes whoring through London with her son, Bertie, and the Prince of Wales, and she sort of swallows it. Every bit of bad behaviour she can cope with. Bad choice of word at the back, yeah, you're right. Even when he chooses a really inappropriate wife. I mean, this is Sophia's mother, Bamba, who is the daughter of an Abyssinian slave and a German merchant. She doesn't bat an eyelid. And, life is good. There's Sophia. Everything seems fine. And if you go forward 17 years, you'll think, yeah, actually, I was absolutely right. This is her debut at Buckingham Palace. You'll see her. There she is, over there, her sister Catherine and her sister Bamba. But this picture is lying to you, because life was not fine. In the interim period, 2 years before this picture is taken, people are worried that Sophia is so badly damaged by grief she will not be able to speak. Because in these intervening years, between the age of 10 and 17, her father tries to get his kingdom back, abandons the family, her mother turns into an alcoholic, she dies at her bedside, her baby brother dies in her arms, and then her father dies dissolute, alone and bankrupt in a Parisian hotel. And she can't look people in the eye, she can't speak in public. There are letters written about how people are worried about her. But this steel in the girl is evident because she managed to pull herself out of it. And I'm interested, my book is really about how this creature turns into, well, first of all, there's the intervening years where she was actually really quite pointless, dog breeding and, socialiting. But then she turns into this, this fighting suffragette who drives press carts of suffragette newspapers through London, embarrassing the palace. She defaces her census forms. No vote, no census. As women do not count, they shall not be counted. She raises money for the suffragettes, even when they're blowing things up and other members of the WSPU are parting ways with Emmeline Pankhurst. She will not. She supports them in everything they do. She actually fights with the police. So this is Black Friday, the infamous Black Friday in 1910. And this is Sophia. I was so proud to find her here in this picture of the morning before they depart. And they went thinking they would present Asquith with an ultimatum, give us the vote. What they met with was extreme violence of a sexual nature. They were sexually assaulted, women were battered, they were thrown down. Churchill, who was the Home Secretary at the time, and he'd given instructions, I don't want them arrested, I don't want them cluttering up the prisons with their hunger strikes, just tire them out. And so there were 5 hours of battling on the streets outside Westminster, a place where I used to work, and that's in our fairly recent history. And Sapphire was arrested because she went and barged her way in between a police officer who was assaulting a woman and thrashed him, and then took her complaint to Winston Churchill, and it was really rather marvellous. I found a little bit of paper signed by Winston Churchill demanding that the Metropolitan Police, or whatever they were called at the time, drop their investigation. She was complaining about police brutality. She also raised money for the Lashkars, these poor benighted souls who came over transporting goods for the Raj and were so badly treated, often not paid, often without shoes, without coats, left to their own devices. She set up a home for the Lashkars in Victoria, at the Victoria Docks, I should say, and saved, I think, thousands of people who passed through those doors over the years. And, as I say, a nurse during World War I, treating the soldiers from India who were dropped at the Western Front, again, ill-equipped in their summer clothes, to fight in some of the coldest, dirtiest parts of the war. And the tragedy was she couldn't speak to them in their own language because she had been exiled and had never grown up with her own culture. But there were English nurses around her who'd served during the Raj who could speak Hindustani better than she could. Those are the things that she did, but I also, in this book, tried to find out a little bit about what she was like. And I found out that she was prone to depression, as her mother was, and that she had an acerbic sense of humour, quite wicked, actually, could be quite mean, and that she loved children. And a great tragedy of her life and the life of all the Dileep Singhs is they never had any children, none of them. But she had a goddaughter, this little baby here, the daughter of her housekeeper, who she adored more than any human being in her life. She also inherited this family here during the war. During the Second World War, these 3 children, the Sarbuts, were evacuated from London, and they went to go and live with an Indian princess, could not believe their luck, and also couldn't believe she was quite as scruffy as she ended up being. And all of these things, the tilt of her head, how she smelled, how she talked, how she laughed, I only know these things because I tracked these people down. This is the baby in that picture, her goddaughter, Drovna, and this is Shirley Sarbat, the little girl evacuee. So I've been extremely lucky with this book. A critic said it was very kindly said it was about the rise of women and the fall of empires, and I'm chuffed to bits that anyone would think that, but it is actually about a woman. It's about this woman and her extraordinary life. Thank you very much.